welcome very much to this session. We are talking about making farm policy fit for an agro-ecological future in the UK. So thanks very much for coming to what I think is possibly one of the most important sessions, important issues anyway. Thank you very much, and thank you to ORFC for giving us this opportunity to talk about this. My name's Vicki Hird. I'm head of farming at Sustain, which is the Alliance for Better Food and Farming, which is an alliance in the UK of over 100 organisations dedicated to better food farm policy and practice. It's over 20 years old, and we do lots of different projects, not just farming, but food and health, many aspects of the food farming system. So have a look at our website. We've put this panel together today because we're at a critical juncture with the way in which the UK in particular, because of Brexit, actually supports its farming and has a vision for farming for the future that takes account of the major challenges that we have, particularly in terms of climate, biodiversity and ecology. So we're here to talk about that today, and the new crop of farm schemes, particularly the environmental land management scheme in England, but also looking briefly at the wider programme that our government has put in place to support farmers, what they do, how their business is run, how the land is managed, and how farming is taken forward. They're all getting finalised at the moment. Some are being piloted this year, so it's a critical time to get them right and to make sure they do deliver for agri-environment. So it's really great that we've got Defra on the panel and two farmers who are going to talk about how their experience of ELMS, because some of us have been on a lot of meetings with Defra to talk about how the environmental land management scheme in particular should develop. So just to remind everybody, if you've not been doing these yet, please do put any questions you have in the Q&A box at the bottom. The chat is great, but I won't see the chat. Sadly, I do love the chat, but Q&A to the panel, to me, in the Q&A button, and I'll get them as they come in, and wonderful ORFC team will send them to me. And afterwards, we hope to have half an hour on Zoom. So if this session on Crowdcast, it doesn't cover everything, we'll be covering it in the half an hour Zoom session afterwards. So you'll be given a link in the chat to click on that when our session's finished, and you'll get into the final half an hour of much more dynamic chat in a Zoom meeting. So just to quickly reiterate, we've got Lynne Phillips who will be speaking first. She's the Defra Delivery Director for Future Farming Countryside Programme, and she'll introduce herself a bit more when she speaks. After her, Adrian Still, who's a long-standing organic cereal and livestock farmer from Worcestershire, also works with the Soil Association. He'll tell you a bit more about himself. And then after that, Rebecca Laughton, who has been combining practical work as an organic grower and farmer with research, campaigning and planning support, particularly with the Land Workers Alliance. And she's been working on an ELMS test and trial, as has Adrian. So they both got some real experience to deliver for this panel discussion. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Lynne to speak on the objectives and some of the detail of the new schemes and what's going to be happening. So over to you, Lynne. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicki. So good afternoon, everyone, and I feel very privileged to be invited to speak at this global event, and it's a pleasure to be in such great company for the next hour or so. A very quick introduction from me. So as Vicki says, I'm a director in Defra. I have lead responsibility for delivery of new agricultural policies and schemes, and that includes the environmental land management scheme. And I've been working on the programme for about 18 months now, so really enjoying meeting the whole kind of range of people who are contributing to the development of our new policies and schemes. So I hope that this will be an informative session. So just before I dive into the detail, I was just going to just outline what I'd kind of planned to cover this afternoon. So I will just take a few minutes to talk about wider changes to English agricultural policy, then provide a bit more context and detail on our proposals and plans for introducing the environmental land management scheme. And then I'll finish off by highlighting some things that you can do or follow up if you want to know more more, and importantly, if you want to get involved. So just moving on to the next slide. There we go. So on the 30th of November last year, we published the Path to Sustainable Farming and Agricultural Transition Plan, and this document sets out the changes that we'll be making to English agricultural policy over the agricultural transition period, and with a particular focus on the years this year through to 2024. And what we try to do with that document is explain what those changes will mean for farmers and land managers in practice, because now that we've left the EU, obviously this is our opportunity to shape English agricultural policy to suit our needs, wants and priorities. And environmentally sustainable farming is actually fundamental to our new approach to England's agricultural system. So we want to see farming in the countryside supporting environmental biodiversity and climate change goals by protecting and enhancing the natural environment. So our future policy will help farmers continue to provide a supply of healthy homegrown produce to high environmental and animal welfare standards, as well as contributing to those important environmental outcomes. So we will be making changes to the agricultural policy over a 7-year period that we refer to as the transition period, and that was put there to help farmers and land managers have the time to adapt and prepare. We very much see this as an evolution from the old system to the new, and not an overnight revolution. So we need to learn from new approaches as we roll those out, and that actually then we can improve and develop over time. What that does mean, though, is during the early years of the transition, we won't be able to answer all the questions that people rightly have about how this is all going to work. And I appreciate that that may be frustrating, and also know that farming operates to long timeframes in terms of planning. So we will aim to provide as much certainty and at regular intervals as we can, sort of sharing information and updates. But to get this transition and move to new policies right, we do need to learn and improve things as we go. So we will be working openly with everyone who's got an interest in the changes. Our farmers produce world-class food for consumption in Britain and around the globe, and are also the stewards of the environment that we all rely on. So from managing landscapes from which we derive clean water, to protecting us from natural hazards such as flooding, we are conscious that our farmers are not currently adequately rewarded for the environmental and public goods that they provide, nor incentivised to go further for those who are making a really strong contribution. So we want to promote the important role of the agricultural community and the positive contribution that it makes to the environment and to the food sector. Farmers and land managers are best placed to decide how they can deliver environmental outcomes from their business and their land, and how to integrate into their food, timber and other commercial activities. So we really want to put farmers and land managers in the driving seat with our new policies. So sustainable or nature-friendly farming is fundamental to our new approach to England's agricultural policies and systems. We want to create new business opportunities alongside producing the great British food that we all rely on, by paying farmers to adopt more environmentally sustainable farming practices to enhance our natural capital. How we approach this transition is absolutely critical to success, and that's why we've set out some guiding principles which I'm sharing here. For us, the change and improvement needs to start now, and not just with the new policies and schemes that are being developed, but within our current ways of working with farmers and land managers and other suppliers, as well as through the services that we provide. There are essentially 4 components to the agricultural transition plan, and I'll start with this first one, which is the changes to the direct payments. So what we've got here is an illustration of how we see the balance of direct payments as they're reduced, changing over time. The government has committed to provide the same cash total to the sector in each year of this Parliament, because we're keen to see a thriving sector. So as we reduce the direct payments, we will redirect the money saved. And as you can see from this diagram, that will be directed into our new agri-environment schemes and also to fund and improve farm prosperity. The second area is around our improving environmental and animal outcomes. So we will continue to support existing schemes whilst we develop and make available the new schemes during the transition period. So this will lead to increased investment in improved outcomes over time. The Agricultural Transition Plan contains more information on each of the schemes, and I'm going to obviously spend a few minutes on the Environmental Land Management Scheme in particular during this session. We do recognise, though, that this mix of new and existing and new schemes may be difficult for people to understand and navigate during this period of change. So we will also be investing in improvements to information, guidance and advice to enable farmers and land managers to connect with the schemes that are most relevant to their business. Moving on from environmental sustainable farming, the next area of support is transition support and support for sustainable productivity. So we're offering a range of interventions that you can see listed here, with more information to be found in the Agricultural Transition Plan. But this is really to help farmers and land managers with the advice and support and access to funding that they might need to get ready for the change. The next area is related to regulation and enforcement. So the changes we're making over the period are not just about funding, but by the end of the transition, we will have reformed our regulatory approach for agriculture. And from this year, we will start improving the way we manage within the existing rules and processes, including some significant areas of concern with cross-compliance. And there's some examples here on the slide of the things that we're actually taking forward right now. So just switching our attention to environmental land management then. So I think most people will be familiar that this is really the cornerstone of our new approach to agriculture, and we'll be rewarding farmers for providing the following public goods. So the Environmental Land Management Scheme becomes a powerful vehicle to achieve the goals of the 25-year Environment Plan and our commitments to net zero emissions, whilst also supporting our rural economy and land managers. We're developing the scheme in collaboration with farmers and land managers, and we'll hear more from colleagues about their tests and trials and their experience on this panel. But that is really important to make sure that we produce the best possible scheme that works for users and that achieves the goals for the sector, the environment, biodiversity and climate change. Payments, we know, are a big feature of that. So we will be setting the payments to make sure that making environmental and climate change improvements is financially viable and fair for farmers and land managers who participate in the schemes. So in developing our approach to calculating payments, we're learning lessons from the current schemes, testing some new approaches through tests and trials, and we'll be further piloting this through our national pilot that will launch later this year. We will set out more detail on the specific types of land management action that we'll plan to pay for and how we will set the payment rates soon. The way that we pay for public goods will be different to existing schemes. So we'll be designing the scheme so that there's less prescription, more choice and flexibility is increased. The length of agreements will be flexible according to individual circumstances and what farmers and land managers want to deliver through their agreements. The Environmental Land Management Scheme is split into 3 components. So they're shown on the screen here, and the plan is for the Sustainable Farming Incentive component to be open and accessible to all farmers to help them contribute to important environmental, climate change and animal health and welfare outcomes. The local nature recovery and landscape recovery components will be for those who want to go further to achieve outcomes in a local area or at landscape or a whole ecosystem scale, and working in collaboration with their neighbours in some cases. So farmers and land managers will have flexibility to decide what they want to deliver under each component and how they want to go about it. But we will be providing guidance and advice from trusted sources to help people to plan. In terms of timings, we know that many farmers and land managers are eager to undertake new environmental activities sooner than the full rollout of environmental land management scheme, which is scheduled for 2024. So we will be rolling out some of the core elements of the sustainable farming incentive from 2022. We're currently deciding which elements will be in the scheme from 2022, and further information will be provided in the early part of this year ahead of the full scheme launch in 2022. And then we'll continue to expand and support the offer through to the full rollout of ELM in 2024. There's just a visual representation now of the timeline. So the test and trials programme is quite key to enabling us to experiment with different features of the new scheme. So we see a whole series of tests and trials running throughout the transition period. We'll have a national pilot that will test all of our components that will be launched from the end of this year. And then with the sustainable farming incentive coming on stream from 2022 ahead of the full scheme rollout from late 2024. So that's shown here with in relation to the BPS payment reduction phase out, and also the continuation of countryside stewardship and new agreements will be available up until 2024 when environmental land management becomes fully operational. So just finishing off, we are at the beginning of a really exciting journey, and I do hope that you will want to join us on that journey. And here are some of the ways that you can. So if you haven't already signed up to Defra e-alerts or our programme blog, then please do so, and we can provide you with links to that, because that's really how we want to let people know about opportunities to get involved, progress that we're making, and invite interested people to join workshops, consultations and our pilots. Please do have a read of the agricultural transition plan if you haven't already, and think about what that change means for your business. And please do take advantage of the support on offer. And if you're not already participating in one of our existing schemes, then do please take a look, because we will make sure that there is a smooth transition from existing schemes into our future environmental land management scheme. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Lynne. That's great. Quick trawl through what's going on, the full plan, and then the details, some details on ELMS. Thanks very much. Inevitably, we've had a lot of questions. I might ask you a couple now, and then there'll be more later when we are in the panel. But one question has been about payment, given that government is paying for goods delivery. Somebody's asked, should the new stewardship and other claims be paid in 28 days rather than much longer period for waiting as we do now and under the European schemes?
Yes, thank you, Vicki. And I think, you know, that is one of the opportunities that we're keen to exploit, you know, that leaving the EU presents, that gives us more flexibility in how we kind of administer and support existing schemes. So I think when I said in the presentation, you know, change and improvement starts now, then that includes the kind of existing countryside stewardship schemes and the future rounds as well. So looking to improve, simplify the process and make the schemes more accessible, but also improve the experience of participants in the scheme as well. And we know payment frequency is one of those things that, and speed of payment is one of those things that can be a particular pain point. So that's definitely something that's in our sights.
I do seem to remember David Kennedy, one of your colleagues, saying something about monthly, which would be very exciting. Yeah. So another question is about whether you'll be using trusted bodies at a local or regional level, like the Farmer Network in Cumbria and Yorkshire, I'm sorry, I don't know who's asked these questions. I'm just getting the questions. That's why I'm not naming you, but apologies. But so the Farmer Network in Cumbria and Yorkshire, do you plan to fund these trusted institutions to deliver support for ELMS? Or is it going to be all through the RPA, or what's the conduit?
No, that's a great question. So, I mean, there are different aspects of support for participants on the scheme. So obviously in terms of, kind of the application process and support through that, and customer service in terms of actually operation of agreements, then we have got obviously great experience and capability within the Defra group, and particularly with colleagues in the Rural Payments Agency, and Natural England obviously are very active in supporting existing schemes, along with Forestry Commission and the Environment Agency. So definitely want to take advantage of all of that capability and expertise. But in terms of sort of advice on farm or to land managers, I think what we're really keen to do is tap into existing networks and existing trusted relationships. So rather than us create a whole new breed of advisors, is actually equip the existing groups and networks with the information and access to resources that they need to be able to advise on farm and with land managers. So we're still working through the detail on that, but very much recognise, how important it is, the trust that's already there and the knowledge and experience in the local area.
Great, thank you. Somebody's asked about the size to be eligible for payments. Now, we've had this 5 hectare cut-off under the European schemes, and do you think, we've been told that will no longer be the case? Is that still going to be a cut-off, which would exclude obviously many smaller producers, even small mixed, but also small vegetable producers, despite the role such enterprises could play in creating local food systems? That would be a shame. So that, and a lot of people at ORFC, would be very keen to know that cut-off is being removed.
We are certainly looking at that. Ministers have not made a final decision yet on eligibility for the new schemes, but we are keen to maximise participation in the new schemes, and not to put any barriers in place unnecessarily for farmers and land managers who can make a really important contribution to some very challenging environmental and net zero targets. So still under discussion, but we're looking to make the eligibility as broad as we possibly can, because the more people and the more land that we've got in agreements, then obviously the greater the contribution to our goals.
Yeah, there's a lot of small producers who can deliver a lot, and particularly in terms of engagement and delivering fresh food to nearby markets. But I think we'll move on now to our first farmer response to ELMS, which is Adrian Steele, who, as I said, is a farmer and also represents the Soil Association. But I'll let him tell you a bit about his thoughts on ELMS. Thank you. Over to you, Adrian.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, Adrian Still. I'm an organic farmer in Worcestershire. I've been farming organically for nearly 30 years. I also work for the Soil Association as Organic Sector Development Advisor, and I'm co-chair of the English Organic Forum. My involvement with the ELMS transition takes 3 forms. One, I'm very fortunate to be involved in the ELMS engagement stakeholder group, which gives us quite close access to Defra's thinking, and in a way give us a test run to some of the concepts being developed. It's slightly tricky because a lot of that is kept confidential, and I don't quite know, even from what Lynne said, what I can and can't say about even what's happening this year. But there are certain principles I can certainly talk about. The other area I'm involved with is a test and trial in Devon and Shropshire, which is funded by Defra, and we're looking to farmers to develop ideas and develop their thoughts upon auditing, their ability to audit themselves, their public goods delivery on their farms, and then feeding back around that to Defra. And then the third area is a taking stock resilience program, and this is the one which I think is actually probably most relevant to today in one sense, because that's where we are talking to farmers who are concerned about the changes. I mean, transition can also be read as disruption. And I think for a lot of farming businesses, heading into a period of disruption is very challenging. And the disruption is taking place not just in relation to new initiatives from Defra, but in a wider world trading environment in which we're now going to be placed. And so, first of all, I would have to say, I've been asked to give my thoughts on how ELMS is developing, and then also what needs to happen to make sure organic and agroecological farms can maximise their impact. So in terms of my thoughts about how ELMS is developing, obviously the latest publication, the Agricultural Transition Plan, is headed the path to sustainable farming. And that's the kind of heading that headline we would have given to a Soil Association campaign document perhaps 20 years ago. And so obviously, you know, we're delighted to see that there is this change of emphasis to recognizing the importance of sustainability, and also the change of emphasis for farm support to be backing public goods delivery, which so far on farm has been not necessarily compensated for, and certainly isn't compensated for in market prices that farmers receive. So, I mean, in terms of the initial questions I tend to get on taking stock, which is about, you know, how do we cope with the reduction of basic payment scheme, which we know is going to reduce down to, you know, half in a couple of years' time. There is the kind of the carrot about, well, how can I actually benefit from the new situation? But here, unfortunately, we can talk about the direction of travel, but we can't unfortunately talk about the money. And really, when we do all get together and talk, you know, the farmers, myself included, we do need to know about the money, because we have to make plans, and our plans on any kind of investment cycle are a minimum of 5 years. And so I think that the delays that have taken place around the launch of this transition have been frustrating to farmers. And I know that a lot of it's been down to politics, and I can sort of candidly say that there's been intermittent Defra ministers in the last few years who've been more interested in Brexit than perhaps steering the ELM policy. But the team at Defra are working really hard with good people involved, and I know they will turn this round. But the crunch year is this year coming, 2021. And I think that they are, and everybody wants to see a big buy-in to ELM. They want to see the public goods delivery under the environmental plan coming through from the agricultural sector. And obviously, you know, we want that as organic and agroecological farmers too. And we would expect to find ourselves in a good position, effectively, seeing our ideas being recognised and supported in ways that in the past have just had sort of half-hearted, almost lackluster official responses from government and sometimes even from Defra itself. So it's frustrating. If I can move on to a bit of a gripe now, that we're not really seeing organic being placed very, in my view, very correctly, or where it should be within this new transition. And agroecological practices are going to be rewarded, but the nature of that reward may unfortunately take more the form of compensation rather than actual positive payment. And I think that there's a danger of some of the good intentions being somewhat diluted to make transition more of just a little change rather than a genuine transition. It's early days, and of course, you know, there has to be a big take-up of ELM amongst the wider agricultural community. And we perfectly accept that the first phase of ELM, sustainable farming incentive, needs to be kept easy for people to get into. We don't want to frighten the horses particularly, and it does need to act as a bridge. But I think fundamentally what I feel still unclear about, and I do have quite a few questions really around ELM still, is what is the ultimate direction of, you know, where are we trying to get to? You know, what is this transition actually towards? And I think once that's clarified a little bit more than perhaps just using words like sustainability, which, you know, let's face it, have perhaps lost some of their resonance now, that we can understand more closely how the levels are going to break down in between the levels of ambition within the scheme, between the three what were tiers and are now components, and whether we're looking at genuine landscape change landscape use, whether we're looking at offshoring our carbon footprint, or how we're going to protect farmers who are farming to higher standards in the UK from imports which might undercut them. There's a wider sort of picture, and I feel that transition alone from Defra and amongst the farming community is not going to be sufficiently robust unless it's supported by wider government action around supply chain reform and trade imbalances and so on. But just going back to where organic farmers are, or how they can maximise their impact, then I think fairly clearly organic farming systems have a robust body of evidence behind them from, I guess, nearly 30 years since EU regulations came in place, of data collected from the whole of Europe demonstrating that there are synergistic benefits of combining or bundling agroecological practices together into a disciplined system, and a disciplined audited system, a system that has international trust and recognition, and which allows for consistent outcome delivery over a number of years. And one of the problems that Defra have got, and I know that Lynne said that the budget is ring-fenced for the next particular few years, but that's only if they can pass value for money assessments, both by the Treasury and from the World Trade Organization. So, and there still are some very old school thinking in those organizations around what is worthwhile, what is agricultural support, and what is support for wider ambition, and particularly around climate change mitigation that wasn't even on their radar a long time ago at WTO. So I think that we've got to be careful to ensure that areas which are as yet difficult to specifically say how much a particular public good like biodiversity can be monetized on an individual basis, you can actually look within the organic sector to see where over a period of time, following an organic system, certified organic system, will deliver specific gains in biodiversity, and therefore you can confidently invest public money in those systems to deliver those outcomes in a way which perhaps at the moment you're going to struggle to deliver individual outcomes through individual actions on an annual basis, which is what appears the SFI at the moment is looking like. There's a lot of detail, and I've realized already I'm going to get stuck in a lot of that detail if I'm not careful. But I think that the message really to everybody is you've just got to get involved in this process. Lynne gave some, there is a genuine desire for co-design within Defra. There are lots of opportunities to get involved, and just please do. You won't regret it. I think I'll probably finish there. Thanks.
Vicki, I'm sorry, you're muted. If you could unmute yourself, that'd be great.
Sorry, thank you very much, Adrian. I was classic mute there. Some real strong messages there around organic, making sure that that's adequately rewarded and part of the vision and the synergistic benefits of a whole farm system being adequately recognised and rewarded. We would certainly echo that at Sustain, and as would many of our members. So I'm going to go swiftly on to Rebecca, who is, as I said, a grower, but also works for Land Workers Alliance, and also has been part of a really exciting, and I've been involved in some of this, tests and trials for the horticulture sector, which hitherto hasn't been necessarily heavily involved in agri-environment schemes. So it's really important that they're part of the process, and Rebecca will talk further about that, I hope. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Vicki. Let me just get my present. Thank you, Vicki. So yes, I am one of the small-scale market gardeners that Vicki was talking about earlier, who is keen to be able to be part of the ELMS scheme and to be able to apply for it. So it's heartening to hear from you, Lynne, that this is looking increasingly likely. And I'll be saying a little bit more about that later on in my talk. It won't surprise anyone who's listening to this that the starting point for the Land Workers Alliance is that it's essential that the Environmental Land Management Scheme rewards organic and agroecological farmers for holistic management. So really picking up from where Adrian left off, we really want the synergistic benefits of running a holistic farm with all the different public goods actions working together to produce the whole being more than the sum of the parts is really, really important to us. And we also are hoping that ELMS will reward people who've been doing this for many, many years, as well as incentivizing people to change from more environmentally damaging practices. Yes, we're obviously keen that this scheme is accessible to farmers with less than 5 hectares, but we're also keen that even if it does become accessible to less than 5 hectares, farmers with less than 5 hectares, that it's actually worthwhile for those with small acreages, because the mechanism of payment could still really not be rewarding if it's paid on a hectareage basis, because the amounts of money would be very small for people with not very much land. We're keen that ELMS rewards public engagement on small farms, and the indications are that this will be possible. One of the 6 categories of public goods is about beauty, heritage and public engagement, which is really heartening, but we want to ensure that this is really rewarded. And we want, of course, to encourage the production of healthy food, especially fruit and vegetables. So public goods from small-scale, mixed, horticultural and peri-urban farms are many and varied, and we feel that our sector has been doing this for many years. I won't dwell on this slide for a long time because it's something that most people will be quite aware of, but organic and agroecological systems tend to be circular, so efficiently using nutrients through composting plant material or manure, efficiently harvesting rainwater and storing it, recycling and reusing packaging, and using renewable energy. Small-scale farms, by their high labour intensity, are often better at crop diversity and by providing biodiversity than some larger farms that tend to have a more monocultural system because they're mechanised. And they're also good at sequestering carbon, public engagement and increasing access to local food through direct and short supply chains, and creating busy, well, they often are very busy, but beautiful, productive environments. These are often in urban or peri-urban areas, but even in rural areas, these sustainable, diverse market gardens are oases of biodiversity in otherwise quite sparse, degraded landscapes, which really provide a refuge for a lot of biodiversity. And we're really keen to stress that horticulture must be included in the environmental land management scheme and differentiated, because for a start, we need much, much more UK fruit and vegetables. The recent shortages of fresh produce just since the new year due to delays in imports coming in because of Brexit are really pointing towards the fact that we need a much more resilient fresh produce sector in the UK. There are many environmental issues in conventional horticulture and even in organic horticulture. For example, water extraction from rivers for irrigation causing ecological problems, soil erosion, particularly in the peat soils of Lincolnshire, peat use for growing composts, and also pesticides, which, although a lot less is used in the way of pesticides in conventional agriculture than used to be, they still are an issue in some parts of horticulture. Horticulture, compared to arable or livestock farming, operates on a smaller land area in quite an intensive way, which has both benefits and disadvantages. from an environmental land management scheme perspective, it means that whilst the environmental benefits aren't so large on a wide scale, they can actually be very impactful if they're changing a very intensive degrading system into a more environmentally regenerative system. But also it means that the payments might not be so big if they're being done on a per hectare basis. So there's real huge potential to improve and expand horticulture in the UK with ELMS support. So Vicki mentioned that at Landworkers Alliance, we are running a horticulture ELMS test and trial called Growing the Goods. And the main part of this trial is involving 40 growers of all scales and types. So that's including organic and non-organic. Some growers who are growing 600 hectares of salad crops and spinach, or large glass houses of tomatoes, all the way to small scale peri-urban horticulture farms, orchards growing both organic and non-organic top fruit and soft fruit. And the three main elements of our test and trial are that we've developed a way of auditing existing public goods actions, so the actions that a grower is doing when they start the ELMS scheme, to establish a baseline. And we're testing two different kinds of audit, one of which is a simple, straightforward checklist, and the other uses a GIS mapping tool called the Land App. And we're using a system called UK Hab, which is a classification system for habitats. So we're getting the participants to classify and map their farm according to the habitats, both productive and purely conservation habitats on their farm, and then allocate codes, management codes, according to how it's managed. The next stage that we tested in the autumn was knowledge sharing mechanisms via peer-to-peer and expert-led workshops. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we've had to do all of these online, but they've still been really fruitful and constructive discussions. And then the current phase is the land management plan phase, which we just started last week. And this phase, we're going to be getting participants to complete a land management table, which I'll show you in just a minute. So just for a very quick glimpse of what the Land App is, the Land App, after a holding has been mapped, results in a color-coded map which shows the individual habitats. I'm sorry, you probably won't be able to see the key very clearly on this, but the orange hatched pieces, orange hatched rectangles are polytunnels, and the the orange striped ones are polytunnels. The orange hatched ones are outdoor horticulture annuals. The green stripes on white are woodland areas, and the pale green with green stripes are grassland areas. And you'd have a map like this, and then actually on the Land App, you'd be able to look at any of these land areas and see the different management codes that have been applied. So in the land management plan, we've really tried to keep this very clear and simple, because in the first phase of our trial, which was the co-design phase, the 20 growers that were in that part of it really put across the message very strongly that they wanted it to be clear and straightforward, rather than complex with the risk of making mistakes and then the risk of penalties. So that's what we've really tried to do with this. And it's quite a traditional sort of management plan table. So going across from the left, the first two columns designate the land parcels. So each of those land parcels, for example, the polytunnels on the last map, would then have a habitat description allocated to them and a code in the purple table. then you would be able to select the public goods action that would apply to that parcel. So it might be minimum tillage. Then in the blue column with the 2 squares, you can note down which of the 25-year environment plan objectives this action applies to. And it may actually apply to several of them, and you can choose a drop-down menu to choose those. And then going across to the final 3 columns, you would have the start date and the completion date and what the barriers are at the moment for carrying out this action. You'd also, in the 4th from the right column, be able to say whether you've been doing this action before or whether it's a new action. So this is what people are going to be testing in the current phase. And we really do believe that this could fit very well with the sustainable farming incentive, although there are a few shortcomings, which I'll just cover quickly. So we really like the fact that the sustainable farming incentive is going to be a stepped concept. So it'll be accessible to all farmers, but also progressive. So encouraging people to go up a sort of ladder of progression towards better environmental practice. And we actually think that this could fit very well with a points-based payment system. One of the things we're discussing a lot in our trial is which payment systems would work better than each other. So this is something we're going to be coming up with at the end of February with the input of all of our participants. However, the real downside in trying to develop some of the standards for the sustainable farming incentive is that they don't seem to be very flexible. It's necessary to carry out all the basic level steps before you can progress on to the medium level of the sustainable farming incentive. And this is going to be really hard to fit with such a diverse sector as horticulture. For example, if you're trying to find a scheme that fits with and rewards glasshouse operation and orchard operations, glasshouse operations operate on a relatively small land area compared to an orchard or, for example, field scale vegetables. And glasshouses are actually already very innovative, using cutting edge technology to achieve water efficiency, energy efficiency, and reduce pesticides. Often even conventional production is not using pesticides at all because the integrated pest management systems are so developed. Whereas orchards are at the moment still evolving towards getting away from agrochemical use. Glasshouses often are more automated, whereas orchards have a high labour requirement. So the costs involved, I mean, they're both high sets of costs, but they're different kinds of costs. But each of them the costs relate to the delivery of public goods and what the cost is that needs to be reimbursed to the farmer. Another point is that glasshouses have a very fast crop turnover compared to an orchard, which has perennial tree crops that lasts 6 to 20 or more years. So, in conclusion, I would say one of the things that's become very clear, both from our Growing the Goods ELMS trial, but also work that I do as part of the Fruit and Vegetable Alliance on the Environment Working Group, is that there's an urgent need for clear comparative metrics.
Rebecca, we need to wrap up. Sorry for questions. I'm sorry, you've gone a bit over, so we haven't got time. Thank you.
I will leave it. Thank you very much.
We can leave that up there. Thanks very much, Rebecca. That was brilliant. So there was lots in there, lots in there for people to think about. But I did want to cover some questions before the end of the session.
Yes.
That was great. So just thank you very much, all of you. Lots of food for thought there. Just one of the questions that's come up and is very popular is about making sure that we're rewarding farmers who are already made changes, who are already farming in a way that supports nature, tackles climate change, etc., and not paying farmers just to fix problems they've already caused. Lynne, I don't know if you could say anything about how you're going to make sure you're not doing that, but you're actually rewarding existing good practice.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think Rebecca just touched on it there in terms of establishing a scheme which is progressive, so people can join at the level which actually they've already achieved and be rewarded at that level, rather than it just being kind of one size fits all. So I think that's one way that we can incentivize and recognize the existing investment actually that people have made in sustainable practice. And then the other thing is, obviously the opposite to incentive is what we do in terms of regulation, and just making sure that we're not rewarding people for taking action that is required through legislation or should be just be done anyway. So I think it's getting that kind of balance of having that progression in there, so people can join at at a point of the scheme that is relative to their maturity in terms of sustainable farming, but not obviously rewarding for poor practice.
Yeah. So there will be recognition of what they've done. Great. The other related question, I think, is about making sure that you're actually paying enough and providing enough incentive to attract the bulk of the farming community and avoid people opting out, because it's just not enough to focus on output maximization, which could be very damaging. The idea that we'll have a polar situation, two models of really good practice and then a lot of very bad practice, obviously not breaking laws, but really intensifying to cope with the kind of situation that Adrian pointed out in terms of imports, for instance. How are we going to make sure that's not happening?
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit similar to my previous response as well, Vicki, is just making sure that there's sufficient in the scheme that fits with a diverse range of businesses and different farm businesses, that the attraction is there. Obviously you talked about the payments as being part of the incentive, but the other thing that we've got evidence on is that sometimes the disincentive is the fear of penalties. So people are quite kind of attracted to the schemes, but then think, well, actually, yeah, but I've heard if you do this or you don't do that, you get financially penalised. So I think that's one of the things that we need to fix as well, is to get the payments rates fair and attractive, but also make sure that people don't think actually the fear of getting it wrong and penalties is not worth the effort, really.
Right. And Rebecca or Adrian want to come in on that at all?
Yeah, I think it is a big challenge because farmers tend to, in response to lower prices and difficult trading conditions, roll their sleeves up, work that bit harder, maybe take on some more ground, more stock, and that's a sort of natural response to increase turnover. So I think that there is going to be a little bit of an issue there, and I think also this allows. What makes me bring up a point I didn't bring up before, which is the role of advice in this transition. I think business advice is going to be really important for farmers to be able to access. And I think that that's kind of the oil by which this is going to run is on good advice from and we found in our test and trial when we did a survey of farmers in Devon and Shropshire that they do really value local advisors, this trusted advice route, and they want to make changes. About 40% of the farmers want to go into agroforestry, for instance, but of those 40%, half of them felt they needed money to be able to do it, and a quarter of them also needed training and advice. So, I think to get big gains rapidly, there's going to need to be cash and advice, I would say.
Yeah, I think this has come up a lot in a lot of our stakeholder meetings, hasn't it, Adrian? We'd be saying, where's the advice? And I don't know if we've got the answers yet, but hopefully we will. The other question, I've got a specific question about soil, and it's not as obvious to people how soil is going to be part of the new scheme. and soil loss critical to protecting biodiversity, how can we be reassured that the precautionary principle to avoid further damage will be stitched into the scheme and to protect, provide for good practice?
That's
Lynne,
a tough
did you want
one.
to say? Yeah.
Yeah,
It's really top. Lynne, I don't know. I mean, I've seen some of the ideas that are coming out from the schemes, and soil is in there. I don't know if you want to elaborate.
yeah, I think we absolutely recognise soil as a key asset, and the kind of the investment in good soil management, how important that is. So really want to make that quite foundational, I think, in the sustainable farming incentive, that actually that's something that most people, if everyone took care of the soil, then obviously we'd see some quite significant, and I'm not suggesting people don't take care of the soil, so I need to be careful, but that's obviously something that at scale could be quite significant improvement. So we do want to encourage and support good soil management, but also I think to the point you were just making, Adrian and Vicki, around advice and guidance as well. So we are investing in making all of the sort of wisdom and learning that's been gathered from previous schemes and from expert advisors, looking to make that available via a kind of a digital platform and other means, so that people can go and think, well, actually, gosh, what can I do? And I know that there's loads of resources out there as well, but just trying to bring some structure to that, so that people feel supported in making those improvements and changes as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, did you want to?
I was just going to say that the soil, it can be sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. If you get a really difficult year, real bad year, things can go downhill again. You've got to repair damage. It's something which I think is more a question of sort of outcomes and longer term. And I would just go back to the idea of being involved in a system which is naturally restorative and does build up carbon over time, as being the kind of discipline which can allow you to invest with confidence public money in rather than an annual basis, when suddenly one bad year and everybody's gone down the snakes and ladders type thing. So I would really really encourage more thought around integrating systems into a system approach into this scheme.
I would also say, Rebecca, probably the horticulture on peatland soils is a very important thing to take thought to.
Yes, I mean both actually management of the soils in fields, but also the peatlands and extraction of peat as a growing medium.
Yeah,
and so we're very keen to have both of those incentivized, and it's been very interesting actually talking to farmers who have been trying to implement cover crops under the current countryside stewardship scheme, conventional farmers, and who've actually really struggled with this, with the limitations, and coming up with something that's adequately flexible and doesn't penalize them if things do go wrong is quite a challenge. But it's why I think the tests and trials process is a very valuable thing to be doing.
Yeah, just on that, will all the tests and trials be publicly available, Lynne, the reports from them?
Yes, yeah. So we do want to, we're going to start to feature some of the tests and trials through our programme blog over the next few months, just, whilst they're in progress, but certainly the learning from those will be available.
Great. Another question has been about baselines. So Holly has asked, I'm now getting names, some landowners and farmers are holding back on getting onto the regenerative path as they will be paid for it later, not so much now. And this could be resolved by getting baseline measurements done now. When do you expect to start these measurements? It's interesting. Baseline measurements. It is actually critical, and Rebecca mentioned that. Yeah.
I think, so if that was a question to me, Vicki, so this is something that we are thinking quite carefully about. And I mean, obviously we, through the schemes that farms and farmers are already participating in. We hold a lot of data, but just thinking about, you know, the additional data that we need so that we can actually make sure that we know what the sort of environmental state is kind of going into schemes, and then obviously be able to measure improvements going forward. But we're working really closely with colleagues who are working on the Environment Bill and the targets that we're looking to set through that legislative process, and also the 25-year environment plan, how we're measuring progress against that, so that we just really want to be careful not to overburden in terms of data collection. So just try and use the sources of data that we've got as far as possible.
Great. Well, we've come up to the end of our session, but we do have an opportunity to ask more questions and have a bigger chat over Zoom. So you should have received the Zoom link in the chat. And I would just like to take the last minute to thank our panelists, and to Rebecca, Lynne, Adrian, thank you very much for giving your insight, and thank you for the next half an hour as well, further insight, but also to encourage anybody who's not able to come to the next one. I would say thank you for coming, but also do get involved. As Lynne said, there's opportunities to get involved and to get details as they come through by signing up to the emails. And forgot what it's called exactly, Lynne, but do look at the Defra website for details. Thank you very much. So if you can all click on the Zoom, we can go over to Zoom, and we'll get onto the questions that have been asked that I haven't covered yet. But thank you. Keep them coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicki.
Thank you.